So, this is happening. Yesterday, I spent about 10 hours. This is Sunday that I'm recording this. You won't see it till Tuesday. I spent about 10 hours setting up and playing a turn of the Grand Tactical Series. This is the 1.1 rules. The game we're actually playing is the Devil's Cauldron. I would love to have a copy, but you can't get it for less than like $300 or $400, so not today. But it looks like this is going to be our game for Winterfest in February. GTS Market Garden, Were-Eagle's Dare, and the Devil's Cauldron together. I feel like if you move fast enough, you can actually get through a large chunk of that entire campaign. So I like what I see of the system so far. I also do see why some people describe GTS as overly fussy. There is no infrastructure for GTS here in Central Ohio. I know exactly one guy who likes it. Everybody else doesn't know anything about it or has tried it and had some kind of negative experience one way or the other. Now, one of the guys I talk to regularly is the fella who calls it fussy and or fiddly, I think is his word for it. And I don't necessarily think that's incorrect for whatever definition you have of that word. Because there's like tons of die rolling. It's quite involved. You're doing a lot of what I would call micromanagement. I don't mind that. I kind of like it. I like what I see out of it so far. I think the system does a lot of good and cool things. I think the chit activation system, while not by any means like a standard chit pull system where you just have a set number of chits in the cup and you pull those chits out, this system, to a greater extent than I've seen before, and I have played other chit pull games. I've played the Dark Valley from Ted Mercier, which is a chit pull game, which is very good, and which the chit pool evolves as the campaign goes on. I've also played Great Battles in the American Civil War, which is now a chit pull system in its GMT incarnation, and in that game, you actually have a relatively randomized selection of chits each turn. Command values play some role in that, but they're not the only determinant. There's some randomness in it as well. GTS, from what I see so far, works the hardest to make that chit pull system an interesting game mechanic in its own right. In terms of you are doing things that involve you in the game as just to participate in it. Now, one might naturally want to say that all this also applies to CSS, the company scale system, the system that designer Adam Starkweather brought with him to Compass Games. And while I have limited experience with CSS, but no experience either, and the two systems are pretty similar. I mean, obviously they're the same scale. You've got the same style of counters. CSS is considerably streamlined. I remember being surprised when fooling with, I think it was Guam, when I'm like, I'm sure I have to roll for this. And I'm looking through the rules and nowhere does it say you have to roll for that. And I'm pretty sure you don't have to roll for it. That surprised me because in GTS you have to roll for everything. It's a little bit like ASL in that respect, although I am reluctant, as always, to make this blanket comparison that, it's just like the ASL, blah, blah, blah. Because that's a very facile thing to say, and there's usually some element of truth to it, but usually not a useful amount of information is conveyed in that statement. The only points of comparison I think we have between GTS and ASL are going to be that they're both World War II tactical systems, and there's a lot of die rolling in both. GTS is by no means as complicated as ASL, but it is not, not simple. It's not that complicated. I think, but there's some things that you have to look at in a different light in GTS than you do if you're not experienced with either that system or CSS or presumably Panzer Command, which is the original, I want to say, West End Games title. West End or Victory Games, I forget which. Designed by Eric Lee Smith, that this mechanic came out of. So there's a very good chance you're going to see some kind of additional follow-up GTS video out of me, and you're definitely going to see some kind of report on what occurs at Winterfest. I am super excited. I've been interested in GTS for a long time. I actually had Where Eagles Dare at one point and got rid of it. I traded it away based on the assumption that I wasn't ever going to get to play it, and that turns out to have been an unfounded assumption. I'm happy to report. Now all I got to do is run down a copy of the Devil's Cauldron. Or, if you don't know, Multiman is talking about reprint. They're both out of print now. They're talking about reprinting both in a giant Mondo combined package that will cover all of Market Garden in the GTS system and updating the entire package to the GTS 2.0 rules. Also, another little quirk of GTS and its evolution is that the version 1 game is different enough from the version 2 game that at least some of the components, specifically the counters, are not compatible between the two. So you cannot backfit version 2 GTS back into the version 1 games, which are these two games. So the reprint, if it ever happens, is expected to update the whole package to GTS 2.0 or 2.1 or whatever it ends up being at that point. Presumably, it will be insanely large and insanely expensive. These are both quite large games, and I have some extra stuff to say about Where Eagles Dare, and this is part of the reason why I did trade it away. I know that there are some folks that like Where Eagles Dare a lot, and I'm not going to say that that's wrong. However, I think it has a flaw in its presentation. There are 4 or 5, I think there's 5 scenarios in this box. Okay, it's a huge game, right? This thing retailed for like $140. It's a huge game. It's 11 counter sheets. They're 5/8-inch counters, so it's maybe not as much as it sounds like, but it's 5 maps, 11 counter sheets. I don't know how many counters that works out to be. There's 5 scenarios, and of which one is the campaign, and of which 2 more require at least 3 of the maps. And I think that's an issue. And it's weird because it's an issue that several other GTS games that I have looked at have not faced, or maybe you should say they did address. The Devil's Cauldron, for example, has tons of small mini-map scenarios and 1-map scenarios and 2-map scenarios. The Crete game, Operation Mercury, has a large number of scenarios. There's like 13 or 15 scenarios in that. The Greatest Day has a huge number of scenarios. If I didn't say the Greatest Day, the ones I've looked at other than this are the Greatest Day, the Devil's Cauldron, and Operation Mercury. And those all have a huge scenario selection that support this giant kit that you've just bought. This one doesn't. This has a very, very cursory training introductory scenario, which is neat, and there's actually more to it than I had remembered, but there's not much to it, right? There's a road, you got about a 30-hex stretch of road, there's some German units on the road, there's some British units at the beginning of the road, the British have to drive a unit down to the end of the road and then drive it back. There's not much to it. You're not going to play that scenario repeatedly, okay? Except as a opening to the campaign, which you can do to determine the status of one of the bridges. There's another campaign called it's the San River Bridge campaign, and it's a 1-map campaign. And there's probably 30 counters on there. It's not super big. I'm actually punching and clicking this again. This is the sun with the wind. No, that's not. That's scenario 4. So here we have scenario 1. This is the counters for scenario 1. This is the counters for scenario 2. So there's, at a guess, there's somewhere between 20 and 30 counters in here. That includes not markers, but it does include the event chits as well. And then that's scenario 4, and that's scenario 3. Scenario 3 is a 3-map game. That's the counters for it, barring the markers. So I just would have preferred to have seen a more robust scenario selection. And I realize that maybe it's limited, but there could have been a wider selection of introductory scenarios, for example, as there are in The Greatest Day. There's a host of introductory scenarios in The Greatest Day. Both The Devil's Cauldron and Where Eagles Dare have fan-created scenarios that are available on Board Game Geek. Now, the one for the Devil's Cauldron is actually the one we're playing. It's called the Saga of the 82nd Airborne. Yes, 82nd Airborne, and it's basically the 82nd Airborne drops the German response, and the Americans are trying to take Grab and Nijmegen. Okay, the Germans. I'm playing the Germans in that scenario, and I'm enjoying it. I'm exploring the system and enjoying doing so. But the Germans have very little to work with in that scenario. Nor are there other parts of the map that they can pull resources from if they decide, if the larger German command had decided that this is where we're going to stop the Allied thrust. There is a scenario for War Eagles Dare, also on Board Game Geek, called "This is the Wide Part." I don't know if that's an actual historical quote or not, but it's in the movie, which is a great movie if you haven't seen it. And it's a one-map scenario of the 30 Corps breakout, and that's a very interesting. I think that's a very interesting subject. I would like to see that, so I'm going to print that off. I did feel like it was worthwhile to go and get the all the stuff printed. This cost about. Well, I've spent $30, but I bought a binder and some graph paper too. So it was about $20 to print the GTS 1.1 rules and Devil's Cauldron exclusive rules, scenarios, and War Eagles Dare stuff as well. I don't know why I did this. I could have printed it myself, and I wouldn't have spent $20 worth of toner. But, you know, it is what it is. So, I think that's about all I have to say about this right now. But it's my guess that I will have more to say. I'd also like to get some actual footage of the game in progress from Winterfest when we play in February. And again, if I haven't said this, I am really excited to play GTS, especially in this particular huge format on this particular topic. I am pointedly ignoring everything related to GTS 2.0 right now because I don't want to become confused. I don't think it's that different, but some of the scaling is a bit different. That's why the counters need to be redone for GTS 2.0. I have had no coffee. It's like mid-Sunday afternoon, and so if this video has been a bit rambly, well, you got what you signed up for. So I want to thank you for watching. I will have another video soon. In fact, the next video will be out on Thursday, and I will see you all again very soon.